I found my prize mare lying in 4 feet of muddy water on a Tuesday morning in March, and I knew immediately that someone was going to pay for what they had done to my farm. My name is Ethan Hargrove, and I had spent the last 15 years building Willow Creek Horse Farm in Loudoun County, Virginia, into something I could be proud of. 20 acres of rolling pasture, a 12-stall barn that I had rebuilt myself, and a breeding program that was finally starting to turn a profit. I had 6 horses on the property that morning, 3 mares, 2 geldings, and a young stallion I had bought at auction the previous fall. By nightfall, 3 of them would be dead, and my entire life's work would be underwater. The rain had started on Sunday night, nothing unusual for early spring in Virginia. We got storms like this every year, heavy downpours that filled the creeks and turned the dirt roads to mud. My property sat in a natural valley, which meant I had always dealt with some drainage issues, but nothing I could not handle with proper grading and a few French drains. The water flowed downhill from the new development that had gone up 2 years ago, Meadowview Estates, a cookie-cutter HOA community with 200 identical townhouses and a management company that seemed to think they owned the entire county. I had noticed the construction equipment on their property the previous week, heavy machinery tearing up the ground near the southern border of their development, right where it backed up to my farm. I had not thought much of it at the time. They were always doing something up there, installing new lampposts, or repainting the community mailboxes, or enforcing some ridiculous rule about what color curtains people could hang in their windows. I had thanked God more than once that I lived on my own land, where I could do what I wanted without some busybody telling me my fence posts were the wrong shade of white. But when I walked out to feed the horses that Tuesday morning and saw the water, I knew exactly what had happened. The entire lower pasture was flooded, not with the slow seepage of groundwater or the temporary pooling from rain, but with a rushing current of brown water that was pouring through a gap in my fence line. The water was coming from uphill, from the direction of Meadowview Estates, and it was flowing fast enough to knock me off balance when I waded in to try to reach the horses. I saw Daisy first, my oldest mare, standing on a small rise of land that was still above water, her eyes wide with fear. Then I saw Thunder, the young stallion, trying to swim against the current. And then I saw Luna, my prize mare, the horse I had paid $30,000 for 3 years ago, lying on her side in the water, her head barely above the surface. I ran into the water without thinking, my boots filling immediately, the cold March runoff soaking through my jeans. I reached Luna and tried to lift her head, but she was too heavy, too weak. Her eyes rolled back, showing the whites, and I could see the gash on her foreleg where she had obviously panicked and tried to run through the fence. The water was still rising, and I realized with horror that I could not save her alone. I pulled out my phone and called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the buttons. The dispatcher answered, and I shouted something about flooding and dying horses, and she said she would send someone, but I knew it would not be fast enough. I called my neighbor, Tom Richards, who ran a cattle operation on the property to the east. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Tom, I need help. My farm is flooding and the horses are drowning." He did not ask questions. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." I went back to Luna and tried again to lift her, but the water was too deep now, over my waist, and the current was getting stronger. I heard Thunder scream, a sound no horse should ever make, and I turned to see him go under. I had to make a choice. I left Luna and fought my way through the water toward Thunder, but by the time I reached him, he was gone. The water had swept him downstream into the drainage ditch that ran along the southern edge of my property. Tom arrived with his truck and two of his ranch hands, and together, we managed to get Daisy to higher ground near the barn. We went back for my two geldings, Cisco and Ranger, and found them huddled together near the fence line, terrified but alive. But Luna and Thunder were gone, and when we finally found my third mare, Bella, she was trapped under a fallen tree branch, already dead. The fire department arrived around 9 in the morning, followed by animal control and a sheriff's deputy who took one look at the devastation and started making calls. The water was still pouring onto my property, and when the fire chief followed it back to the source, he found what I had already suspected. Meadowview Estates, HOA, had redirected their entire storm drainage system to dump directly onto my land. The fire chief came back an hour later with photographs and a grim expression. "Mr. Hargrove, you need to see this. They dug a drainage channel and deliberately directed it through your fence line. This was not an accident." I looked at the photos on his phone. Someone had excavated a trench at least 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide, lined it with concrete culvert pipes, and aimed it straight at my property. The natural drainage path that had existed before, which directed water safely into the county storm system, had been blocked off with filled dirt and gravel. Every drop of runoff from 200 houses, every gallon of water from their streets and parking lots and rooftops, was now being funneled directly onto my farm. "Who authorized this?" I asked. "That's what we need to find out," the deputy said. He was a young guy, maybe 30, with a notebook and a professional demeanor that told me he took this seriously. "You know who runs the HOA? I know the president is a woman named Patricia Thornton. She has been trying to get me to sell this land since the development went up. She said it was an eyesore and brought down their property values." The deputy wrote that down. "We'll need to talk to her. In the meantime, we need to document everything. Do you have a veterinarian who can examine the deceased animals?" I called Dr. Sarah Chen, who had been my vet for 10 years. She arrived within the hour, took one look at the scene, and started crying. Sarah had delivered Luna's foal 2 years ago, had treated Thunder for colic the previous winter, had been there for every vaccination and checkup. These were not just animals to her. They were patients. She examined each body carefully, taking photographs and making notes. Luna had drowned, her lungs full of water. Thunder had died from blunt force trauma, probably from being swept into the concrete culvert or the fence posts. Bella had drowned as well, trapped and unable to escape. "This is criminal negligence," Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger. "These animals died because someone made a deliberate decision to redirect that water. This was not an act of God. This was an act of stupidity and malice." The deputy agreed. "We are going to treat this as a criminal investigation. I will need statements from everyone, and we will need to get a county engineer out here to assess the damage." By late afternoon, my farm looked like a crime scene. Yellow tape marked off the flooded areas. A county engineer was taking measurements and photographs. A second deputy had arrived and was interviewing Tom and his ranch hands. And I was sitting on the tailgate of my truck, wet and cold and angrier than I had ever been in my life. Patricia Thornton arrived at 4 in the afternoon, driving a white Mercedes SUV with a Meadowview Estates parking sticker on the windshield. She was exactly what I expected. Mid-50s, blonde highlights, yoga pants and a designer purse, and an expression that said she was used to getting her way. She parked on the road above my property and picked her way down the muddy driveway in shoes that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, not offering her hand. "I understand there has been some sort of incident. I stood up, and I saw her take a step back. Your HOA just killed 3 of my horses. You diverted your storm drainage onto my property and flooded my farm. I am sure you are upset, but I do not think it is appropriate to make accusations without evidence." The deputy stepped forward. "Madam, I am Deputy Collins with the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. We have evidence that someone excavated a drainage channel on Meadowview Estates property and directed it onto Mr. Hargrove's land. Do you know who authorized that work?" Patricia's expression did not change. "We have been doing some drainage improvements. The county approved all of our permits." "I need to see those permits," Deputy Collins said. "I will have our management company send them over, but I can assure you that everything we did was legal and proper. If Mr. Hargrove's property flooded, it is because his land is in a flood zone. That is not our responsibility." I felt my hands clench into fists. Tom must have seen it because he stepped up beside me and put a hand on my shoulder. "Ethan, let the deputy handle this." "Your development has been here for 2 years, I said, my voice barely under control. "I have lived here for 15 years. I have never had flooding like this. And now, 1 week after you dig up your drainage system, 3 of my horses are dead. You did this." Patricia finally showed some emotion, her face flushing with anger. "I did not do anything, and I do not appreciate being spoken to this way. If you have a legal complaint, you can take it up with our attorneys. Otherwise, I have nothing more to say." She turned and walked back to her SUV, her heels sinking into the mud with every step. Deputy Collins called after her, "Madam, we will need those permits by tomorrow morning, and you should be aware that this is now a criminal investigation." She did not respond, just got in her car and drove away. The water finally stopped rising around sunset. The fire department had managed to block the drainage channel with sandbags, temporarily stopping the flow onto my property, but my lower pasture was destroyed. Fence posts were down, the ground was churned into a muddy swamp, and worst of all, I had 3 dead horses that needed to be dealt with. Sarah helped me arrange for the bodies to be removed. There was a rendering facility in Fauquier County that handled large animal remains, and they sent a truck the next morning. I stood there and watched as they loaded Luna, Thunder, and Bella, and I felt something break inside me. These were not just livestock. Luna had been gentle enough to let kids pet her at the county fair. Thunder had been the future of my breeding program. Bella had been the first horse I bought when I moved to Virginia, the one who convinced me that I could make this farm work. I spent that night in the barn with Daisy, Cisco, and Ranger, the 3 survivors. They were traumatized, shaking, and refusing to eat. I sat in the straw and tried to calm them, but I could barely calm myself. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Luna drowning. I saw Thunder being swept away. I saw the water pouring through the gap in my fence, and I knew that someone had done this deliberately. The next morning, Deputy Collins came back with the county engineer, a woman named Jennifer Wu, who had been working for Loudoun County for 20 years. She had reviewed the permits that Patricia Thornton's management company had submitted, and her face was serious. "Mr. Hargrove, I need to show you something," she said. She spread out a set of plans on the hood of her truck. "This is what the HOA submitted to the county." According to these plans, they were going to improve their drainage system by connecting to the existing county storm sewer on the north side of their property. The water was supposed to flow away from your land, toward Route 50. "But that is not what they did," I said. "No, it is not. What they actually built is completely different. They blocked off the northern drainage and cut a channel to the south, directly onto your property. This was not approved by the county. This violates every drainage ordinance we have, and more importantly, this was done deliberately. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Deputy Collins was taking notes. "So we have them for permit fraud, illegal construction, and whatever charges we can bring for the dead animals. You can also bring charges for environmental violations," Jennifer said. "They just dumped potentially contaminated runoff from 200 houses onto agricultural land without any kind of treatment or filtering. If that water was carrying fertilizers, pesticides, motor oil, or anything else, they have violated the Clean Water Act." I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. "What happens now?" "Now we build a case," Deputy Collins said. "I am going to recommend that the Commonwealth's attorney file criminal charges. The county will also issue citations and fines, and you should contact a lawyer about civil damages." I had never sued anyone in my life. I believed in handling problems directly, working things out, being a good neighbor. But Patricia Thornton had killed my horses and destroyed my farm, and she had done it deliberately because she wanted my land. This was not something I could work out over a handshake. I called a lawyer named Marcus Chen, Sarah's cousin, who specialized in property disputes. He came out to the farm that afternoon, took photographs, reviewed the documents that Deputy Collins and Jennifer Wu had provided, and nodded grimly. "You have a strong case," Marcus said. "Property damage, loss of livestock, emotional distress, potentially punitive damages if we can prove malice. The question is whether the HOA has enough insurance to cover this." "I do not care about the insurance," I said. "I want them to pay for what they did. And they will. But we need to be strategic. We are going to file a civil suit and we are going to ask for every penny you lost, plus damages. We are also going to demand that they fix the drainage system immediately and restore your property to its original condition." Over the next 2 weeks, my life became a nightmare of legal proceedings, insurance claims, and media attention. A local news station picked up the story, and suddenly I had reporters showing up at my farm, asking to interview me, filming the damage. The headline was always some variation of "HOA kills horses," and while I appreciated the support, I did not want to be famous for this. I wanted my horses back. I wanted my farm back. I wanted my life back. Patricia Thornton and the Meadowview Estates HOA board hired a law firm from Washington, D.C., the kind of firm with marble floors and partners who wore suits that cost more than my truck. They denied everything. They claimed that the drainage work had been approved, that they had followed all proper procedures, that any flooding on my property was due to natural conditions and poor land management on my part. They even tried to claim that my horses had died of natural causes, implying that I was a negligent owner who had left them in dangerous conditions. That was when Sarah Chen got involved in a way that changed everything. She was furious that anyone would suggest she had not properly cared for the animals, and she contacted the Virginia Veterinary Medical Association to request an independent review. 2 veterinarians from Virginia Tech came down and examined her reports, the photographs, and the evidence from the scene. Their conclusion was unambiguous. The horses had died as a direct result of the flooding, and the flooding had been caused by the illegal drainage work done by Meadowview Estates. The Commonwealth's attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Catherine Porter, filed criminal charges in late April. Patricia Thornton, the HOA president, was charged with 3 counts of animal cruelty, multiple counts of permit fraud, and violations of state environmental laws. The HOA itself was charged as a corporate entity. And the contractor who had done the drainage work, a company called Superior Site Solutions, was also charged as a co-conspirator. I will never forget the day Patricia Thornton was arrested. It was a Thursday morning in May, and I was in the barn repairing fence posts when Tom called me. "Turn on the news," he said. "They are taking her in now." I went into the house and turned on the local news station. There was Patricia being led out of her townhouse in handcuffs, her face pale with shock. The reporter was explaining that she had been arrested on multiple felony charges related to the deaths of 3 horses at a neighboring farm. The camera panned to show Meadowview Estates with its perfect lawns and matching mailboxes, and then it cut to footage of my flooded pasture, the dead horses, the destruction. I should have felt satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired. The trial was set for September, but the civil case moved faster. Marcus filed the lawsuit in May, asking for $150,000 in damages. $30,000 for Luna, $20,000 for Thunder, $15,000 for Bella, $30,000 for property damage and lost income, $30,000 for veterinary bills and cleanup costs, and $25,000 in punitive damages. The HOA's insurance company tried to lowball me with an offer of $40,000, claiming that was the fair market value of the horses. Marcus told them to go to hell. We went to mediation in July. It was held in a conference room in Leesburg, with a retired judge acting as mediator. On one side of the table was me, Marcus, and Sarah Chen as an expert witness. On the other side was Patricia Thornton, 3 other members of the HOA board, 2 lawyers from the D.C. firm, and a claims adjuster from their insurance company. The mediator, Judge Raymond Foster, was in his 70s and had the tired look of someone who had seen every kind of stupid lawsuit imaginable. He listened to both sides present their cases, reviewed the evidence, and then called a private session with the HOA's lawyers. When he came back, his expression had changed. "Mr. Hargrove, I have reviewed the evidence and I believe you have an exceptionally strong case. The defendants clearly violated multiple laws and regulations, and the damage to your property is well documented. I am going to recommend that the defense make a serious offer to settle this matter." The HOA's lawyer, a man named Robert Caldwell who looked like he had never been outside of a boardroom in his life, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, our clients maintain that they acted in good faith and followed all proper procedures. However, in the interest of avoiding a lengthy trial, we are prepared to offer $75,000 to settle all claims." Marcus did not even hesitate. "That is insulting. My client lost 3 valuable horses, suffered extensive property damage, and has been unable to operate his business for 4 months. We are asking for $150,000, and that is actually a conservative estimate. Perhaps if your client had properly maintained his drainage systems, this would not have happened," Caldwell said. I stood up so fast my chair fell over. "My drainage systems were fine for 15 years until you tore up your property and dumped your water on my farm. 3 of my horses are dead because your clients were too cheap to connect to the county storm sewer like they were supposed to." Judge Foster held up his hand. "Mr. Hargrove, please sit down. Mr. Caldwell, I would advise you not to blame the victim here. The evidence is very clear that your clients violated their permits and caused this damage. Now, I am going to give you one more chance to make a reasonable offer, or we are going to trial, and I suspect a jury will award much more than $150,000. The HOA's team huddled together, whispering urgently. Patricia Thornton looked like she wanted to argue, but one of the other board members, a man in his 60s, shook his head firmly. Finally, Caldwell turned back to the mediator. "We can offer $125,000. Marcus looked at me. I thought about Luna, about Thunder, about Bella. I thought about the weeks of work ahead to restore my farm. I thought about Patricia Thornton being led away in handcuffs. "Tell them I want $150,000, plus they fix the drainage system properly, plus they repair my fence line, plus a written apology to be published in the county newspaper, I said. Marcus relayed my demands. The HOA's team whispered some more. Finally, Caldwell nodded. Agreed. Judge Foster drew up the settlement agreement, and we all signed it. I walked out of that conference room with a check for $150,000 and a promise that my property would be restored. It was not enough to bring my horses back, but it was something. The criminal trial happened in September, and I was called to testify. Catherine Porter, the Commonwealth's attorney, was brilliant. She walked me through every detail of what had happened, showing the jury photographs of the flooded pasture, the dead horses, the illegal drainage channel. She called Jennifer Wu to testify about the permit violations. She called Sarah Chen to testify about the cause of death for the horses. And she called the contractor, who had been given immunity in exchange for his testimony. His name was Gary Mitchell, and he looked miserable on the witness stand. Miss Thornton called me in February, he said. She told me they had a drainage problem and needed to redirect their storm water. I drew up plans to connect to the county system, like the code requires, but she said that would be too expensive. She said the property downhill from them was just a farm, and it would be easier to just cut a channel and let the water go there. Did you tell her that was illegal? Catherine asked. Yes, madam, I did. I told her she needed county approval and she needed an easement from the property owner. She said not to worry about it, that she would handle it. She offered me an extra $5,000 to do it her way. And did you do it her way? Gary nodded miserably. Yes, madam, I needed the money. My business was struggling. I know it was wrong, but I did it anyway. Patricia Thornton's defense attorney tried to claim that she had been misled by the contractor, that she had believed the work was legal and proper. But the jury did not buy it. The evidence was too clear. The permit showed one plan, and the actual construction was completely different. There were emails between Patricia and other board members discussing the cost savings of directing the water onto my property instead of connecting to the county system. One email literally said, "It's just a farm. Who cares if it gets a little muddy?" The jury deliberated for 3 hours and found Patricia Thornton guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison, suspended to 6 months with the remaining 18 months on supervised probation, plus community service and restitution. The HOA itself was fined $50,000 for corporate negligence, and Superior Site Solutions was fined $25,000 and lost their county contracting license. I was there in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Patricia's face went white, and she started crying, saying something about how she had only been trying to save the HOA money, how she had not meant for anyone to get hurt. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Thornton, you made a series of deliberate decisions that resulted in the deaths of 3 animals and the destruction of a man's livelihood. You committed fraud by submitting false permits. You violated environmental regulations. And you showed a complete disregard for the law and for your neighbor's property rights. The fact that you were trying to save money does not excuse your actions. It makes them worse, because it shows that you valued a few $1,000s more than you valued those animals' lives." Patricia was taken into custody that day. She would serve her 6 months in the Loudoun County Jail, and when she got out, she would have a criminal record and a ruined reputation. The HOA board forced her to resign, and the new board president was the older man who had been at the mediation, a guy named Frank Morrison, who seemed genuinely horrified by what had happened. Frank called me a week after the trial. "Mr. Hargrove, I want to apologize on behalf of Meadowview Estates. What Patricia did was unconscionable, and the board should have been paying closer attention. We have hired a new engineering firm to properly connect our drainage system to the county sewer, and we are going to make sure your property is completely restored." "I appreciate that," I said. "I also want you to know that we fired the management company that was advising Patricia. They were the ones who suggested cutting corners on the drainage work. We have hired a new company that actually follows the law." True to their word, the HOA hired a reputable contractor who spent 6 weeks fixing the drainage system. They tore out the illegal channel, restored the natural drainage paths, and connected everything properly to the county storm sewer. They repaired my fence line with new posts and wire. They brought in topsoil and grass seed to restore the lower pasture. By the end of October, my farm looked almost like it had before the flood. Almost, but not quite. The 3 empty stalls in my barn were a constant reminder of what I had lost. I used part of the settlement money to buy 2 new horses, a mare and a gelding, both from a breeder in Middleburg. They were good horses, well-trained and healthy, but they were not Luna or Thunder or Bella. I also used some of the money to install a better drainage system on my property, with catch basins and underground pipes that would direct any future runoff safely away from the pastures. I was not going to let this happen again. Sarah came by one afternoon in November to check on the new horses. She walked through the barn, examining each stall, and then she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I am so sorry, Ethan. I know these new horses are not the same. No, they are not. But they are here and they are alive, and I am going to take care of them. You did the right thing, going after the HOA. What Patricia did was criminal and she needed to be held accountable." "I just wanted my horses back," I said. "I wanted everything to go back to the way it was." "I know. But sometimes you cannot go back. You can only go forward." Christmas came and went. The new year arrived. I kept working the farm, breeding horses, training, selling. Life went on, but it was different. I was more cautious now, more aware of what could go wrong. I checked the weather forecasts obsessively. I walked the fence line every week, looking for problems. I kept detailed records of everything, just in case I ever needed to prove something again. Patricia Thornton was released from jail in March, almost exactly a year after the flood. I saw her once, driving through Leesburg, and she looked smaller somehow, diminished. She did not see me, or if she did, she pretended not to. I heard through the local gossip network that she had moved away, somewhere down south, trying to start over. I did not wish her well, but I did not wish her ill either. She had been punished for what she did, and that was enough. Meadowview Estates got a new HOA president and a new reputation. The story had been covered extensively in the local media, and everyone in Loudoun County knew what had happened. Property values in the development dropped for a while, and several owners sued the HOA for the damage to their investment. Frank Morrison managed to hold things together, but it was not easy. He called me once to apologize again, and I appreciated that. He was trying to fix what Patricia had broken. In the spring, I held a small memorial service for Luna, Thunder, and Bella. It was just me, Sarah, Tom and his wife, and a few other friends from the area. We planted 3 oak trees on the upper pasture in a spot where they would grow tall and strong, where I could see them from the barn. Sarah said a few words about how much the horses had meant to all of us, and then we stood there in silence, remembering. Life on the farm settled into a new rhythm. The new horses, a mare named Stella and a gelding named Max, adapted well. Daisy, Cisco, and Ranger recovered from their trauma, though Daisy never quite trusted storms the same way again. Whenever dark clouds rolled in, she would stand by the barn door, waiting to be let inside, and I always obliged her. She had earned that. I started breeding again in the summer. Stella had excellent bloodlines, and I found a good stallion at a farm in Upperville. By the next spring, she had a healthy foal, a filly that I named Hope. It seemed appropriate. The legal aftermath continued for years. The HOA's insurance company tried to deny coverage, claiming that Patricia's actions had been intentional and therefore not covered by the policy. That led to another lawsuit, which Marcus handled. Eventually, the insurance company settled, paying out the full amount plus legal fees. The county also sued the HOA for the cost of investigating and prosecuting the case, and they won. Superior Site Solutions, the contractor that had done the illegal work, went out of business. Gary Mitchell lost everything: his company, his reputation, his savings. I felt a little sorry for him. He had made a bad decision, but he had not been the one who pushed for it. He had just been weak and greedy, and he had paid a heavy price. Years passed. My farm recovered. I never got close to the level I had been at before the flood. When Luna was my prize mare and Thunder was the future of my breeding program. But I built something solid and sustainable. I learned to be content with what I had, to appreciate the horses that were still with me, to find satisfaction in the daily work of running a farm. I also learned to be more involved in local politics. I started attending county planning meetings, paying attention to what developments were being approved, what drainage systems were being installed. I became something of a watchdog, the guy who would stand up and ask hard questions when some developer wanted to cut corners. I was not popular with the business community, but I did not care. I had seen what happened when people prioritized profit over responsibility. Patricia Thornton never came back to Loudoun County. I heard through the grapevine that she was living in Georgia, working as a property manager for a small apartment complex. She had served her probation without incident, completed her community service, and paid her restitution. She had done her time, in the legal sense. But I suspected that she would carry the weight of what she had done for the rest of her life, just as I would carry the memory of my horses drowning in water that should never have been on my property. The oak trees I planted for Luna, Thunder, and Bella grew taller each year. I would sit under them sometimes in the evening, watching the sun set over the pastures, and think about how much had changed. The trees were strong and healthy, their roots running deep into the Virginia soil, their branches reaching toward the sky. They were a living memorial to the animals I had lost, a reminder that life continues, that growth is possible even after tragedy. One afternoon in late May, about 5 years after the flood, I was working in the barn when a car pulled up the driveway. It was an older sedan, dusty and worn, and when the driver got out, I did not recognize her at first. She was thinner than I remembered, her hair gray instead of blonde, her face lined with years and regret. But when she spoke, I knew immediately who she was. "Mr. Hargrove, I am Patricia Thornton. I do not expect you to want to talk to me, but I had to come." I put down the feed bucket I was holding and just looked at her. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to get off my property and never come back. But another part of me was curious about why she had come. "What do you want?" I asked. I wanted to apologize in person. I know I apologized in court, and I know I sent a written apology that was published in the paper, but I needed to say it to your face. What I did was unforgivable. I destroyed your farm and killed your horses because I was arrogant and cheap and stupid. I have spent every day of the last 5 years thinking about what I did, and I will never forgive myself for it. She was crying now, tears running down her face, her voice breaking. "I did not understand what horses meant to you. I thought they were just animals, just property. I did not understand that they were living beings that you cared about, that you loved. And when I realized what I had done, it was too late. They were already dead." I stood there in silence, not sure what to say. I had imagined this moment many times over the years, imagined telling Patricia Thornton exactly what I thought of her, how much pain she had caused, how much I hated her for what she had done. But now that she was actually here, standing in front of me broken and apologetic, I found that I did not have the energy for hate anymore. "You can never make this right," I said finally. "You can never bring them back, I know, but I had to try to apologize anyway. I had to let you know that I understand what I did and that I am sorry." "Why now? Why come here after 5 years?" "Because I finally got out of probation. Because I have been living with this guilt for so long that I could not carry it anymore. Because I needed to face you and admit what I did." I looked at her, this woman who had been so arrogant and self-righteous, who had valued money over life, who had destroyed my farm without a second thought. She looked old now, worn down by guilt and consequences. She had served her time in jail, paid her fines, lost her reputation and her position and probably most of her friends. She had been punished in every way the law could punish her. "I accept your apology," I said, "but I do not forgive you. I do not think I ever will." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. Thank you for listening to me." She turned to leave, but I called after her, "Patricia." She stopped and looked back. "Do not ever let anyone else do what you did. If you are managing property, if you are making decisions that affect other people, do it right. Follow the law. Think about the consequences. Do not cut corners." "I will not," she said. "I promise you I will never do anything like this again." She got in her car and drove away, and I never saw her again. I heard later that she had moved back to Georgia and had become an advocate for animal welfare, volunteering at shelters and speaking to community groups about the importance of responsible pet ownership. I did not know if that was true or just a story people told themselves to make sense of what had happened, but I hoped it was true. I hoped that she had learned something from the tragedy she had caused. Life on Willow Creek Horse Farm continued. The seasons turned, the horses grew older, new foals were born. I expanded the operation slowly, cautiously, never pushing too hard or taking unnecessary risks. I hired a part-time helper, a young woman named Emma who was studying equine management at the community college. She was good with the horses, patient and careful, and she reminded me of myself 20 years earlier, full of dreams about building something meaningful. Tom Richards, my neighbor, became one of my closest friends. We helped each other through rough seasons, shared equipment, watched each other's properties when one of us was away. He had been there on the worst day of my life, and I never forgot that. When his wife passed away a few years later, I was there for him, sitting with him in his kitchen late at night, listening to him talk about memories and loss and how hard it was to keep going when the person you loved was gone. The legal case became something of a landmark in Virginia property law. Marcus Chen used it as an example in seminars he taught about HOA liability and property rights. Catherine Porter, the Commonwealth's attorney, cited it in speeches about environmental enforcement. The case was written up in legal journals and used as a teaching tool in law schools. What had happened to me and my horses became a cautionary tale about the dangers of HOA overreach and the importance of following regulations. I did not want to be famous for tragedy, but if my story could prevent someone else from going through what I went through, then maybe there was some purpose in it. One evening in late summer, about 7 years after the flood, I was sitting under the oak trees watching Stella and her second foal, a colt named Journey, grazing in the pasture. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was full of the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of Tom's cattle. It was peaceful, the kind of evening that made me remember why I had bought this land in the first place, why I had poured my life into building this farm. Emma came out of the barn and walked over to where I was sitting. "The evening feeding is done," she said. "Do you need anything else before I head home?" "No, I am good. Thanks for your help today." She hesitated, then sat down on the grass beside me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever think about giving up?" "I mean, after everything that happened, after losing the horses and going through all those legal battles, did you ever think about just selling the farm and doing something else?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes, I thought about it. Right after the flood, when I was standing in that muddy water watching my horses die, I thought about walking away and never looking back. It would have been easier to sell the land, take the money, and start over somewhere else doing something else. But you did not." "No, I did not. Because this farm is who I am. These horses are who I am, and if I had walked away, then Patricia Thornton would have won. She wanted my land. She wanted me gone, and I was not going to give her that satisfaction." Emma nodded slowly. "I hope I can be that strong someday." "You will be. You have to be if you are going to work with horses. They will break your heart over and over again. They will get sick, they will get injured, they will die. But they will also give you moments of joy that nothing else can match. You just have to decide if the joy is worth the heartbreak." We sat there in silence for a while, watching the horses, listening to the evening sounds. Then Emma stood up and brushed the grass off her jeans. "I will see you tomorrow, Mr. Hargrove." "See you tomorrow, Emma." She walked to her truck and drove away, leaving me alone with the horses and the memories. I stood up and walked down to the pasture, leaning on the fence and watching Stella and Journey. The colt was strong and healthy, with good conformation and a curious personality. He would make a fine horse someday, maybe even as fine as Thunder had been, but I would never know because I had decided not to keep him. I had a buyer lined up, a good home where Journey would be trained and loved and given every opportunity to reach his potential. I was letting him go because holding on too tight to things, to memories, to what might have been, was no way to live. Luna and Thunder and Bella were gone, and no amount of wishing or grieving would bring them back. All I could do was honor their memory by continuing the work, by caring for the horses that were still here, by making sure that their deaths had not been in vain. The court had made Patricia Thornton pay for every animal she killed. The money could not bring them back, but it had allowed me to rebuild, to continue to keep the farm running. Justice had been served in the legal sense, but the deeper justice, the restoration of what had been lost, that was something only time could provide. As I walked back to the house that evening, I looked up at the oak trees, now tall and strong, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Luna, Thunder, and Bella were gone, but they were not forgotten. They lived on in those trees, in the land they had loved, in the work I continued to do every day. And that, I supposed, was enough. It had to be enough because it was all I had. The farm was quiet now, the horses settled in for the night, the barn doors closed and secured. I went inside and made dinner, ate alone at the kitchen table, and then sat on the porch watching the stars come out. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the call of an owl, and closer by, the soft nicker of one of the horses settling down to sleep. This was my life now. This was what remained after the storm, after the flood, after the loss and the anger and the long fight for justice. It was quieter than it had been before, scarred by tragedy but still standing, still here, still mine, and tomorrow I would get up and do it all again. I would feed the horses and muck the stalls and repair whatever needed repairing. I would continue the work that Luna and Thunder and Bella had been a part of, carrying their memory forward into whatever days remained. That was all anyone could do, really. Carry the memory of what was lost, honor it through the work of living, and try to build something good from the ruins of what had been destroyed. I had done that. And I would continue doing it for as long as I was able. The HOA had diverted storm water onto my horse farm. The court had made them pay for every animal they killed. Justice had been served. The guilty had been punished. The damage had been compensated as much as money could compensate for such a loss. But the real work, the hard work of recovery and rebuilding and learning to live with loss, that work had been mine alone. And I had done it. Not perfectly, not without pain, but I had done it. And that was enough.